The first time buried sacrifice makes you think you're settling into a classic, rich man, ruins the woman who wronged him, setup. It doesn't just lean into that fantasy. It sharpens it. It stares at you from across the marble lobby with that specific kind of cruelty that only comes from heartbreak that never healed, and it asks, very calmly, are you sure you want this? And I'm telling you right now, I thought I knew what I was signing up for. I did not. This drama had me walking around my apartment like I was carrying somebody else's secret in my ribs. Welcome back to Flick Flare. And yeah, I'm already sweating because this show is the kind that makes you pick a side, then makes you feel guilty for picking a side, then makes you understand why you picked a side in the first place. Subscribe if you want more long-form drama spirals like this. And before we get too far in, spoiler approach, moderate. I'm going to talk about the major premise and the big emotional turns that the show itself places front and center. But I'm not going to spend this whole review rattling off every twist like I'm reading a police report. If you're brand new, you'll still get the vibe. And if you've watched, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about when I start describing the moments that hurt in a very specific way. Because Buried Sacrifice is, at its core, a story about a misunderstanding that isn't just a misunderstanding. It's engineered. It's curated. It's a choice someone makes with shaking hands and a straight face so the other person can live. That's not, oops, we didn't communicate. That's, I am going to let you hate me because hatred will keep you alive. And the show keeps returning to that idea, like it's pressing on a bruise to prove it's real. 3 years after an agonizing breakup, Scarlett is working at a Manhattan hotel. And in walks Dante Vitale, mafia heir, power in a suit, grief in a jawline that never unclenches. He isn't just her ex. He's the ex who has been rehearsing this reunion in his mind like it's a scene he deserves to direct. He actively seeks to humiliate her, not in some cartoonish mustache-twirling way, but in that slow, socially surgical way where he can ruin your dignity without raising his voice. And the first thing Buried Sacrifice does well, like immediately well, is it understands humiliation isn't loud. Humiliation is quiet. Humiliation is being forced to smile while someone mispronounces your name on purpose. There's a particular flavor to the way Scarlett is framed in those early present-day sequences that I couldn't stop thinking about. The hotel environment is all gloss and reflections, and rich people who don't look at staff like they're humans, and Scarlett is constantly placed slightly off-center, like she's always one step away from being swallowed by the space. It's not subtle, but it's effective. She's in a world that's designed to make people like her feel temporary. And then Dante arrives like the universe decided to give that world a face. And you can feel the show's emotional thesis in the way Dante looks at her. Not just anger. There's this sick fascination in it, like he wants to confirm she really is as cold as he's told himself she is. Because if she isn't, then what does that make him for surviving? What does that make him for waking up in the ICU, kidney failing, life hanging, and remembering that when it mattered most, nobody in his bloodline stepped up? Hold that thought, because the drama doesn't let you forget the half-siblings. It doesn't let you forget the politics of family in a mafia dynasty, where family is a word people use when it benefits them. Dante's father dies, a mafia war ignites, Dante ends up fighting for his life in the ICU with acute kidney failure, and none of his half-siblings are willing to help. That detail matters so much more than it seems like it should at first, because it plants the seed for Dante's worldview. Love is a bargaining chip, loyalty is a costume, and blood is just blood. So when a miracle anonymous kidney donor saves him, his brain can't even process it as someone loved me. It processes it as someone moved a piece on the board. And then Scarlett, right after he survives, betrays him by publicly aligning with his greatest rival and half-brother, Damien. If you can hear the crowd gasp through the screen, yeah, that's the show's engine. Dante's resentment is not floating resentment. It has weight. It has a timeline. It has a villain. And as far as he knows, that villain is Scarlett. Here's where I want to slow down, Because it would be so easy to watch this kind of story and slip into a lazy reading. Dante is the wounded rich boy who thinks pain entitles him to cruelty, Scarlet is the poor girl who chose money, and Damien is the shiny villain who took her like a prize. But Buried Sacrifice doesn't actually let you enjoy that simplicity for long. It keeps forcing you to look at what each person thinks they're doing and what they're actually doing. What hooked me is that the show isn't asking, did she betray him? It's asking, what does someone have to believe about you to make your sacrifice invisible? And then it answers that question in the most brutal way possible. They have to believe the worst version of you already fits. Because the truth, this is the buried sacrifice right there. Scarlet was his secret savior. She donated her own kidney. She orchestrated a cruel misunderstanding to ensure he would survive and let her go. And if your stomach just dropped a little reading that, imagine watching the show drip that truth into the present day like poison into water. Suddenly, every act of humiliation isn't just romantic angst. It's a man punishing the person who literally kept him alive. And I'm not saying that like, oh, Dante is evil, case closed. The drama makes him compelling precisely because he's not punishing her for a petty slight. He's punishing her for something he thinks was a spiritual violation. When he believes she aligned with Damien, the rival, the half-brother, the person symbolizing the war that nearly killed him, he reads it as Scarlet choosing the enemy while he was weak. He reads it as her stepping over his hospital bed to shake the hand of the man who benefits from Dante's suffering. If you've ever been in a place where you already felt disposable, that kind of perceived betrayal becomes nuclear. And just like that, you're stuck. Because you can understand his wound and still hate what he does with it. There's a scene early on, one of those scenes where you can tell the director knew exactly how to weaponize stillness, where Scarlet is mid-task at the hotel. It's the kind of job moment where your body is on autopilot. Hands moving, face neutral, heart elsewhere. The lobby is too bright, too clean, and everything echoes. Then the air shifts. That's the best way I can describe it. The sound design almost pulls the ambience back, and you hear the click of expensive shoes before you really register why that matters. Scarlet glances up, and you watch recognition crawl up her face like a shadow. Not the cute, oh my ex is here recognition. The kind that hits your organs first. Dante is there, and he doesn't look surprised to see her. He looks like he's been waiting. He doesn't rush. He doesn't perform anger for the room. He just stands, lets her see him fully, and then he smiles like he's about to test something. The camera lingers on Scarlet's throat swallowing, her fingers tightening around whatever she's holding, the way she tries to keep her posture professional, because that's the only armor she has left. And then Dante says something. Nothing even has to be obscene for it to land like an insult. It's the tone. It's the familiarity forced into a public space. It's him reminding her, in front of everyone, that he knows her, and she can't escape the memory. That moment, that's where I realized Buried Sacrifice was going to be mean in a very precise way. And I don't say mean like it's a flaw. I say it like it's a creative decision. This drama is interested in the anatomy of power. Who has it, who performs it, who uses politeness as a knife. If you've ever worked service, by the way, Scarlet's situation hits even harder. Because the hotel isn't just a setting. It's a stage where rich people can rewrite you in real time. The show makes Scarlet's professionalism feel like a survival tactic, not a personality trait. And then it puts her ex, the kind of man who can buy consequences like they're optional, in front of her and says, okay, survive this. What's sneaky is how the show uses time. Present day is sharp, clipped, controlled. Past at NYU, when Scarlet and Dante fell deeply in love, feels warmer in concept even when the content is sad. You can sense that those earlier days were about possibility. Not just romance, but the kind of early 20s belief that love is strong enough to outrun inheritance, and that you can date someone with shadows in their family and still keep your hands clean. The show doesn't have to spell that out. It's in the way those memories are held. They feel like something Scarlet, has been trying not to touch for 3 years. And Dante? The NYU era matters because it gives him a baseline that the present-day version has shattered. When people talk about character arcs in these romantic melodramas, they usually mean he's cold then he becomes warm again. Buried Sacrifice is doing something more jagged. It's showing you a man who used to have softness, then trauma didn't just harden him, it reorganized him. Like his internal furniture got thrown out a window and replaced with steel. Here's the question the show keeps daring you to answer. If someone becomes cruel because they think love is fake, do you blame them for the cruelty or do you grieve the person they used to be? And can you do both without feeling like you're excusing harm? Because let me be clear, Dante's humiliation campaign is not romantic. It's not spicy. It's not that cute trope where the guy is mean because he cares. It's control. It's retaliation. It's him trying to restore his sense of dominance after the most humiliating thing that ever happened to him, being helpless, being in ICU, realizing his body could fail him, realizing his family could abandon him, realizing survival was out of his hands. So now he walks into Scarlett's life and tries to make her feel the way he felt. Helpless, exposed, under someone else's narrative. And Scarlett's response is where this drama either works for you or it doesn't. Because she doesn't come in swinging. She doesn't do the sassy clapback thing every scene. She absorbs. She steadies. She tries to exist in a small space without provoking the larger predator circling her. And I've seen people get impatient with that kind of heroine. Like, why isn't she fighting harder? But I actually think her restraint is part of the tragedy. Scarlett isn't weak. Scarlett is exhausted. Scarlett has been living with a missing piece of her body and a missing piece of her life. And now the person she did it for is looking at her like she's a parasite. Let's talk about that kidney donation, because it's the kind of plot device that could become absurd if the writing doesn't respect it. Buried Sacrifice treats it like what it is, a physical sacrifice with permanent consequences, not a metaphor you can undo with an apology. The idea that Scarlett gives up a kidney, her secret savior move, and then intentionally orchestrates the misunderstanding so Dante will let her go, that's not just noble. That's psychologically messy. That's a young woman deciding that being hated is safer than being loved under mafia conditions. That's someone choosing her own villain origin story because it might keep him alive. And I know how dramatic that sounds. Trust me, I'm aware I'm sitting here like, yes, the kidney of love. But the reason it works is because the show builds the sense that in Dante's world, love is a liability. If Scarlett stays the beloved girlfriend, she becomes leverage. If she becomes the opportunist who ran to Damien, she becomes disposable in a different way. And disposable might mean safe. Right there is where the title actually earns itself. Buried Sacrifice isn't just about doing something good in secret. It's about burying it so deep that even the person you saved can't dig it up. Because if he knew, he might try to repay it. And repayment in mafia land is never just flowers and a thank you speech. It's obligation. It's ownership. It's you're mine now. So Scarlett chooses the crueler route. Let him think she's the worst. The drama, for me, really blossoms when it stops being about who did what and becomes about who gets to define what it meant. Dante defines Scarlett's action as betrayal. Scarlett defines it as salvation. Damien's presence, this rival half-brother figure, functions like a mirror that distorts everything. Because if Scarlett is seen with Damien publicly, the world will interpret it. The mafia will interpret it. Dante will interpret it. And the show is very interested in interpretation as violence. And if you've ever been misunderstood in a way that changed your life, like truly misunderstood, where correcting it would cost you something you can't afford to lose, this drama gets under your skin. I had this weird moment watching where I remembered a time I let someone believe I didn't care, because caring would have meant a conversation I wasn't ready to have. Obviously, I did not donate an organ. Okay, I'm not auditioning for sainthood here. But that feeling of choosing the story that hurts you because it protects someone else? That's real. That's why this plot doesn't feel like pure soap to me. It feels like an extreme expression of an ordinary human defense mechanism. Now, the contrarian take I didn't expect to have. I don't actually think Scarlett's choice to orchestrate the misunderstanding is automatically the right choice, even though the show clearly frames it as sacrificial and tragic. Hear me out before you throw your remote. We are trained to applaud self-sacrifice in Roman stories, to treat it like the highest form of love. But buried sacrifice also hints at something darker in that kind of sacrifice. Control. When you decide someone can't handle the truth, and you make the choice for them, you're loving them, yes. But you're also removing their agency. You're also deciding that your pain is acceptable collateral as long as their life continues. And maybe you're thinking, well, Dante was literally in ICU, fighting for his life. Yes, absolutely. But the long-term ripple is what the show is about. Because in saving him physically, Scarlett creates an emotional cancer that grows for 3 years. Dante survives, but he becomes a man fueled by resentment. And she survives, but she becomes a woman who lives in a world where the person she loves would spit on her if he knew what she did. That's not just tragic. It's avoidable, maybe? And the show is brave for letting you sit in that discomfort. The writing is at its best when it doesn't let Scarlett's sacrifice become a halo. It lets it be complicated. It lets it have consequences. It lets it raise the question, is martyrdom love, or is it a refusal to be seen? And Dante is the perfect storm to test that question, because he's not someone who reacts normally to pain. He reacts strategically. He's a mafiaer. Even when he's emotional, he's tactical. So his humiliation of Scarlett is never just a tantrum. It's a campaign. It's him using the tools he has, money, influence, social dominance, to rewrite her as the villain in front of as many witnesses as possible. Because if everyone agrees Scarlett is trash, then Dante doesn't have to confront the possibility that he misjudged the person who loved him most. The hotel setting keeps paying off here because it's a place built on performance. Guests perform wealth. Staff performs servitude. Management performs politeness. And Dante performs power like he was born into it, because he was. Scarlett is forced into this rigid role where she can't break face. She can't scream. She can't chase him down the street and demand answers like in a campus romance. She has to stand there with her name tag on and take it. The show uses that to make the romance feel less like fantasy and more like humiliation as foreplay, except it's not sexy, it's nauseating. And yet there are flashes, little micro moments where you see Dante's rage wobble. A pause too long, a glance that lingers somewhere it shouldn't. The tiniest crack where his eyes soften and then harden again as if he caught himself feeling something. Those moments are what kept me leaning forward. Because it's not just he hates her. It's he hates that he might not be able to hate her forever. This is also where casting and performance matter. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I can review acting without actors' names like I'm legally barred from appreciation. But I will say, whoever plays Scarlett has to sell a very specific contradiction. She has to look like someone who can be broken and still functional. She has to hold grief in her posture without turning every scene into a sob fest. And when she's in front of Dante, she has to look like she's doing math in her head. Which expression keeps me safest? Which word keeps me employed? Which silence keeps him from digging deeper? And Dante's actor needs that ability to be both magnetic and alarming. If he's too charming, the cruelty feels like a game. If he's too monstrous, you lose the tragedy. The sweet spot is that he's attractive in the way a storm is attractive from far away. You can't look away, but you also know it could kill you. Okay, let me pull you into one of the most gutting emotional ideas the show plays with, the anonymous donor. Dante is miraculously saved. That word miracle is doing heavy lifting. Imagine waking up knowing someone out there gave you part of their body, and you don't know who. Imagine that gratitude with no target. It becomes restless. It becomes paranoia. In a mafia war context, it becomes suspicion. Because if you can't assign goodness to a person, you assign strategy to a faction. So when Scarlett betrays him, it slots into that paranoia perfectly. Of course the donor wasn't love. Of course it was manipulation. Of course he was saved so he could be used. That's the mindset trauma creates. You stop believing in gifts. And that is why the show's central irony hurts. The donor was love. The donor was the one person he already trusted. Every time the drama flashes back to NYU, it's like the show is holding up a photo of a house before it burned down. The romance there isn't just cute montage stuff. It's foundational. It's where Scarlett's decision later comes from. If you don't believe they were deeply in love, then her kidney donation becomes melodrama. So the show has to convince you, these two are real. Not perfect, but real. And it does, in a way that feels surprisingly intimate for a story with mafia politics in the background. It's in the softness of shared space. The way two people sit near each other when they're not performing. The way their faces look when they think the other person isn't watching. That's what sells the tragedy. Not the big plot points, but the small domestic faith that gets shattered. Now let's talk about Damien, because he could have been the most boring archetype in the world. The rival half-brother. The other side. The man whose existence is basically a walking plot complication. But the show uses Damien more like a symbol than a seducer. He's not just another man, he's the living embodiment of Dante's family fracture. He's the proof that Dante's world has multiple heirs clawing for legitimacy. And legitimacy in that world means power. And power means blood. So when Scarlett publicly aligns with Damien, the betrayal isn't romantic. It's political. It's as if she walked into a battlefield and chose the opposing flag. Which means Dante's emotional reaction has a public dimension. His humiliation of her becomes part of his own self-myth. Look how I punished disloyalty. Look how I control the narrative. In mafia air terms, it's not just heartbreak, it's reputation. And Scarlett is stuck in the crossfire of that. She becomes a prop in a war story, even though her real story is a hospital bed and an operating room and a decision made in terror. Do you see why this drama got to me? It's not just the romance. It's the way love becomes evidence in a larger case. One thing I loved, genuinely, is the editing rhythm when the show toggles between past love and present hostility. It doesn't always do it with big sweeping transitions. Sometimes it does it with a gesture. A hand reaching, then a hand pulling away. A familiar nickname in the past echoed by a formal miss in the present. A warm light in a memory replaced by cool, unforgiving hotel illumination. Those contrasts are simple, but they hit because they're emotional logic, not gimmick. And the soundtrack, again, speaking impressionistically because I'm not out here listing track names, knows when to shut up. Thank you, Buried Sacrifice, for not drowning every tense scene in violent manipulation. Some of the most painful exchanges are allowed to sit in the sound of breathing, in the faint room tone, in the click of a glass on a table. Silence becomes part of the humiliation. Silence becomes part of the longing. If you've ever had a conversation with someone where what you didn't say was louder than what you did, you know exactly why that works. There's also something about the show's relationship to New York that feels less like postcard glam and more like emotional geography. Manhattan here is not big city dreams. It's an ecosystem. It's where people disappear into jobs, where money talks in lobbies, where you can be surrounded by thousands and still have no one who knows what you did to survive. Scarlett being a hotel employee specifically matters. Hotels are where people pass through, and Scarlett's whole life feels like passing through, never settling, never safe, always temporary. Meanwhile, Dante is the opposite. He's rooted, inherited, entitled. He doesn't pass through spaces. Spaces adjust to him. So when he returns and starts pressing his thumb on her life, it doesn't feel like a random coincidence. It feels like gravity. And I have to confess something kind of embarrassing. The kidney element made me unusually emotional in a way I wasn't ready for. Not because I'm squeamish, though, yes, I am a little squeamish. I'm not trying to be brave online, but because the idea of carrying someone else's survival inside you is intense. Like, imagine every time Scarlett breathes, there's a ghost of what she gave away. Imagine living 3 years with that knowledge and no recognition, no gratitude, not even the comfort of being misunderstood in a normal way. She's misunderstood in a way that makes her look greedy when she literally gave away part of her body. That's the kind of injustice that makes you want to throw something at the screen, and then you remember you paid for your own TV, so you calm down. What I appreciate is that buried sacrifice doesn't turn Scarlett into a saint who never wavers. The concept itself implies she had to orchestrate cruelty. She had to publicly align with Damien in a way that would be seen as betrayal. That means she did something active, not passive. She chose an image. She chose a role. And that tells you Scarlett has steel. It's just steel pointed inward. And Dante, for all his cruelty, isn't written as clueless. He's written as someone whose intelligence is trapped inside his pain. The show keeps giving you these moments where you can sense he's searching for something that doesn't fit. Like he wants the story to be simple, Scarlett bad, Dante wronged, Damien villain, and yet there are details that itch. There's always that sense that if he paused long enough, the truth would rise like a drowned thing. That's the tension that keeps the episodes moving even when the plot slows down to savor a confrontation. Because let's be honest, a show like this lives or dies on confrontations. It's built on charged dialogue, on near confessions, on the constant threat of truth. Buried Sacrifice understands that, and it stages those confrontations like duels. Not always with big gestures. Sometimes it's just two people standing too close in a corridor, speaking politely while their faces are doing something else. And I love when a drama trusts faces. I love when a drama understands the eyes can deliver a twist before the script does. There's a recurring visual motif. At least, it felt like a motif that I kept noticing. Thresholds, doorways, elevators, hallways, places where people cross from public to private. That's where Scarlett and Dante keep colliding. And it makes sense, because their whole relationship now is about what's allowed to be said out loud versus what must stay hidden. The buried sacrifice is literally a secret inside a body, and the show keeps putting them in spaces where secrets feel claustrophobic. Now, I'm going to poke at one of the show's potential weaknesses, even though I loved it overall, because loving something doesn't mean pretending it's flawless. The humiliation instrument's engine can get repetitive if the writing doesn't vary the emotional color. If every Dante and Scarlett scene is him being cruel and her silently enduring, you risk flattening both characters. And there were moments where I could feel the show skating close to that edge, like it was enjoying Dante's dominance a little too much, or trusting the audience would find it hot without interrogating it. But when the show is smart, it counterbalances that by making Scarlett's interiority present even in silence, by letting you see how much she's choosing not to react. That's the difference between endurance and passivity. Endurance is active. Endurance is expensive. Also, I need to talk about how the mafia backdrop is used. This drama doesn't require you to be a crime politics expert. It's not trying to be a procedural. The mafia war, the inheritance, the half-siblings refusing to help, the rival half-brother Damien. Those are pressures, not puzzle pieces. They exist to make the love story feel dangerous in a way that isn't just emotional. And I think that's the right call. Because the more you get lost in who ordered what hit, the less the kidney sacrifice matters. The heart of this drama is the human cost, not the organizational chart. But it still uses mafia logic to make the romance choices feel less like melodrama and more like survival. Scarlett doesn't just leave because she's sad. She leaves because staying could kill him, and maybe kill her, and definitely turn her into leverage. Dante doesn't just humiliate because he's petty. He humiliates because power is the language he's fluent in now. And I want to linger on that ICU detail for a second, because acute kidney failure is not just a plot obstacle. It's a metaphor that could have been corny, but the show makes it visceral. Kidney failure is your body not filtering what it needs to filter. Toxins build up. Your system can't cleanse itself. Tell me that isn't exactly what's happening emotionally with Dante. He can't filter his grief. He can't cleanse his resentment. So it builds up and it poisons his relationships. Meanwhile, Scarlett has literally lost a filter, in a sense. She's missing an organ. She's living altered. And emotionally, she's missing the part of her life where she got to be loved openly. She's functioning, but she's changed. The show doesn't have to say any of that out loud. It just has to show you to people living with damage in different forms. And the way it uses public perception. Scarlett's betrayal is public. That word publicly is doing so much heavy lifting in the premise. Public betrayal is different. It's not just between two people. It becomes a social fact. It becomes something other people comment on, judge, file away. That means even if Scarlett wanted to explain herself later, she's not just fighting Dante's belief. She's fighting the world's memory. So when Dante humiliates her publicly now, it's not random cruelty. It's symmetrical cruelty. It's him returning the favor in his mind. You embarrassed me when I was dying. Now I'll embarrass you while you're trying to live. And if that doesn't make your chest feel tight, I don't know what to tell you. One of my favorite things about Buried Sacrifice is that it refuses to let time heal anything automatically. 3 years have passed, and Scarlett is still scarred. Dante is still furious. The world didn't soften them just because the calendar moved. And that feels truthful. People underestimate how long it takes to recover from something you never got closure on. Especially when closure would require revealing a truth that could explode lives. Okay, lean in, because this is where the drama starts playing with your sympathies like it's a cat batting a glass off a table. Dante is awful to Scarlett. Period. But the show keeps reminding you of the origin of that awfulness. The ICU, the abandonment, the family refusing to help, the feeling that his life was saved by someone anonymous when his own blood wouldn't lift a finger. That kind of trauma turns gratitude into suspicion. So when he looks at Scarlett and sees gold digger, it's not just misogyny or classism, though there's definitely a whiff of both in how he frames her. It's also him needing her to be greedy so his survival makes sense in his worldview. If she's greedy, then her actions are rational. If she's loving, then his hatred is monstrous. So he clings to the greedy narrative like it's life support. And Scarlett, meanwhile, clings to silence like it's the only way to keep him alive. Even now, 3 years later, you get the sense she's still protecting him from the truth, not because she thinks he'll die physically, but because she thinks the truth would destroy whatever stability he's built. Or it would pull her back into his orbit in a way she can't survive. Or it would make Damien, the rival half-brother, retaliate. The show leaves enough ambiguity in the motivations that you can argue with yourself, which I love. I love when a drama doesn't spoon-feed morality. There's a moment, more of an emotional beat than a specific plot event, where you can sense Scarlett wanting to speak, wanting to correct the record, and then you watch her swallow it. That swallow becomes a recurring action. Scarlett swallows words the way she once gave away an organ. Quietly, completely, with nobody clapping for her. And that, I think, is why the drama hit me so hard. Because it's about the violence of being unseen. Not just unseen by strangers. Unseen by the person you would have died for. If you're new to this kind of melodramatic romance, you might be wondering, isn't this too much? And yes, it is too much. That's the point. But the show earns its excess by grounding it in emotional logic. It doesn't feel like twists for shock. It feels like human beings making impossible choices under pressure, then paying for those choices later like debt with interest. Also, the title Buried Sacrifice isn't subtle. But subtlety isn't the job here. This is opera. This is emotional opera in designer clothes. Something else I adored. The show's willingness to make Dante look bad without immediately cushioning it with a redemption beat. It trusts that you can keep watching a character even when you disapprove of them. That's such a lost art in romance dramas, because creators get scared audiences will bail if the male lead isn't constantly actually sweet deep down. Buried Sacrifice says, no, he's being cruel. Sit in it. And then it lets the humanity leak through in involuntary ways rather than scripted apologies. Like when Dante's cruelty seems rehearsed, but his reaction to Scarlett's pain isn't. That's the good stuff. That's where you see the conflict. He wants to punish her, but he also doesn't want her to be someone who deserves punishment. He wants to be right about her, but he also wants the past to have been real. Now, I'm not going to pretend this show is a perfect feminist text or whatever. There are moments where you can feel the genre's appetite for female suffering. Scarlett is put through it. And if you're someone who's tired of watching women be emotionally flogged for the sake of angst, I get it. I really do. But I will say, the show gives Scarlett a specific kind of power that isn't about winning arguments. It's about enduring consequences she chose. It's about the terrifying autonomy of sacrifice. And that's different from a helpless victim narrative. Still, I can't deny there were times I wanted Scarlett to snap. Like, not politely. Not with a quiet tear. I wanted a full-bodied, messy, ruin-the-room moment. And the fact that the show made me want that tells you it's doing something right. It's building pressure. It's making you feel the injustice in your muscles. So let's talk about pressure. Because the drama structure is basically a pressure cooker. The present-day humiliation scenes keep tightening the emotional screws, while the past reveals keep explaining why those screws exist. And hanging over all of it is the secret. Scarlett is the donor. Scarlett is the savior. Dante is abusing the person who saved his life. That secret is a loaded gun on the table, and the show knows exactly how to make you stare at it. What I found especially smart is how the show uses Damien's existence to complicate the donor secret. Because even if Scarlett wanted to confess, the confession itself has political implications. If Dante finds out Scarlett saved him, what does that mean for the narrative of his family? What does that mean for the half-siblings who refuse to help? What does that mean for Damien as the rival? It could shift alliances. It could humiliate other people. It could reignite conflict. So Scarlett's secret isn't just personal, it's dangerous. That's what makes the romance feel like it's sitting on top of a landmine. Every tender moment is threatening because tenderness could lead to truth, and truth could lead to war. And yes, I'm aware of how deliciously unhinged that sentence is. Welcome to this genre. We're eating pain for dinner. There's another layer here that I think is easy to miss if you're only watching for the romance. Class. Scarlett works at a hotel. Dante owns the kind of life that walks through hotels like their hallways in his house. Their love story started at NYU, which is already a particular social environment. Proximity to wealth, proximity to ambition, proximity to future power. And then the mafia element is like wealth plus violence plus legacy. Scarlett's body literally becomes collateral in a world that was never built to protect her. So when Dante calls her an opportunist or a gold digger, again, speaking to the premise we have, it hits extra bitter because it's him weaponizing class narratives to justify his hatred. It's the oldest trick. Paint the poorer person as the predator so the powerful person doesn't have to feel guilty about crushing them. And the show lets that sit there, ugly and familiar. If you're waiting for me to say, but don't worry, it becomes fluffy later, no, not in the way you might want. The romance here is not a warm blanket. It's a scar you keep touching to see if it still hurts. But that's also why the tender moments, when they happen, feel like oxygen. And I don't even mean explicit tenderness. Sometimes it's just a glance that lasts too long. Sometimes it's Dante's voice dropping half an octave when he says her name. Sometimes it's Scarlett flinching when he steps close, not because she's afraid of him physically, but because her body remembers wanting him. That is such a specific kind of pain, when your heart is loyal to a memory your mind knows is dangerous. Okay, I want to bring you back to that public betrayal image for a second, Because it's the kind of thing that defines a relationship in a story like this. Scarlet publicly aligns with Damien, Dante's rival and half-brother, right after Dante is saved by an anonymous kidney donor. In Dante's mind, that sequence becomes cause and effect. He almost dies, he's saved by a miracle, and then Scarlet chooses the enemy. It feels like fate mocking him. It feels like being spat on by the universe. So in the present day, when Dante humiliates Scarlet, it's not just revenge on her. It's revenge on fate. It's him saying, I won't be mocked again. That's why he needs her to feel small. And Scarlet, because she knows the truth, experiences his cruelty differently. Every humiliation is a reminder of what she did. Every insult is a reminder that a sacrifice is buried so deep it's become a tomb. And she can't dig it up without detonating everything. Do you see how the drama traps both of them? That's why it works. It's not just miscommunication. It's mutually assured destruction. Now, craft-wise, there's a particular way the show uses proximity that I want to gush about. In a lot of romance dramas, the camera is obsessed with faces in close-up, right? Buried Sacrifice uses closeness as a threat. When Dante steps into Scarlet's space, it's not automatically romantic. It's invasive. It's him reminding her he can. And when Scarlet doesn't step back, it reads as courage and heartbreak at the same time. The blocking becomes emotional dialogue. Who moves first, who yields space, who stands their ground. And the show plays with verticality too. Again, hotel setting, elevators, levels, penthouse vibes implied even when not shown explicitly. Dante feels like he belongs above. Scarlet belongs below. Every time they meet on equal ground, the show makes it feel temporary, like the world is going to correct itself unless they fight for that equality. If that sounds like I'm overreading, maybe. But it's the kind of overreading this show invites because it's so committed to its emotional architecture. It wants you to feel how power shapes romance. Now let me give you another confession. I have a low tolerance for male leads who humiliate women and then get redeemed with one sad monologue. Like, I'm allergic to it. I break out in hives. So I went into Buried Sacrifice ready to be mad. And I was mad. But I was also invested. Which annoyed me, honestly. I kept catching myself wanting Dante to figure it out. Wanting him to stop. Wanting him to see her. And then I'd remember. He doesn't know. He doesn't know she's the donor. He doesn't know she orchestrated the misunderstanding to save his life. He's acting out a lie, and she's living inside it. That dynamic is twisted in a way that's compelling, but it's also ethically thorny. The show doesn't fully resolve that thorniness quickly, and I'm grateful. It lets the discomfort stay. Because if Dante gets forgiven too easily, then Scarlet's suffering becomes spectacle. And if Scarlet is rewarded too neatly, then the sacrifice becomes transactional. The show needs to walk this knife edge, make you ache for reunion without making you forget what it cost. There's also something very specific about the way Dante's resentment is described as lingering. Lingering resentment is different from fresh anger. Fresh anger burns hot and then fades. Lingering resentment is curated. It's maintained. It becomes part of identity. Dante has built a self around the idea that Scarlet is a heartless opportunist. If that self collapses, then what's left? A survivor who owes his life to a woman he punished. A man who became cruel because he was wrong. That's hard to face. That's why people cling to resentment. Resentment can feel like structure. Scarlet, on the other hand, has built a self around letting him go. She orchestrated the misunderstanding to ensure he would survive and let her go. That means she's practiced letting go. She's lived in a life designed around absence. Dante returning threatens that structure too. Because what happens if he doesn't let her go now? What happens if he decides he wants to keep punishing her? Or what if he starts wanting her again? That's the terrifying part. Love can be as dangerous as hate when the power imbalance is this extreme. One of the show's smartest emotional moves is making Dante's humiliation feel targeted, but also in some ways, impersonal. He's not humiliating Scarlett because of who she is today. He's humiliating her because of what she represents in his story. She's the symbol of betrayal. She's the symbol of being laughed at by life. So even if Scarlett stood in front of him and said, "I'm not that person," he wouldn't hear it. Not yet. Because he's punishing a ghost. And Scarlett is responding not just to Dante, but to her own guilt. Because even though she saved him, she did deceive him. She did orchestrate a misunderstanding. She did align publicly with Damien in a way that cut Dante open. Her hands aren't clean emotionally, even if her motives were protective. And that's what makes her compelling. She's not a saint. She's a person who made an impossible call and is paying for it. I want to highlight the show's title one more time in a different way. Buried Sacrifice suggests something interred, something hidden underground, something that might be unearthed later. And the drama treats the truth like a body. The longer it stays buried, the more it changes. The more it decays into something toxic. The more it becomes dangerous to dig up. So the suspense isn't just, will Dante find out? It's, if he finds out now, will it save them or destroy them? Because timing matters. Truth delivered too late can feel like betrayal all over again. That's such a nasty, delicious emotional trap. And the show plays it with patience. It doesn't rush you to the confession. It lets the relationship dynamic rot a little so that when tenderness tries to grow, it has to push through something ugly. And yes, I'm aware I'm describing romance like it's a compost pile. That's what this show does to you. It makes you poetic about decay. Let's circle back to Damien for a second. Because the idea that Scarlett publicly aligned with Dante's greatest rival and half-brother is not just about making Dante jealous. It's about positioning Scarlett in a power structure. The show is saying, Scarlett's body saved Dante, but Scarlett's image was used to wound him. And Damien benefits from that wound, at least in perception. So Damien becomes this gravitational force in the narrative even when he's not on screen, because he represents the world Dante believes Scarlett chose over him. That's why the love triangle energy here is less who will she pick and more whose narrative will win. It's about control of the story. And as a viewer, you become complicit. Because you're watching, knowing Scarlett is the donor, knowing she's the secret savior, and you're watching Dante humiliate her anyway. You're holding the truth while the characters bleed around it. That creates a specific kind of tension that I love in melodrama. Dramatic irony as torture. You're not waiting to learn what happened. You're waiting for the characters to catch up to what you know. And that waiting can be agonizing. There's a particular kind of scene this show keeps returning to that I want to praise, the almost confession. The moment where Scarlett gets close to telling the truth, and then something interrupts, maybe a public space, maybe a reminder of danger, maybe Dante's own cruelty slamming the door shut. Those moments can feel cheap in weaker shows, like the writers are stalling. Here, it usually feels psychologically justified. Scarlett isn't just waiting for the right time. She's terrified of what truth will do. Dante isn't just not asking. He's afraid of answers that don't fit his rage. So the silence persists, not because the plot needs it, but because the characters do. And that's where Buried Sacrifice becomes more than a soap twist. It becomes a character study in avoidance. If you're a newcomer, you might be wondering, is the show asking me to forgive Dante? Not immediately, at least not at the part of the story that sits in this premise. It's asking you to understand him, which is different. Understanding is not absolution. Understanding is just seeing the machinery. And the show is very focused on machinery. How grief turns into control, how love turns into leverage, how sacrifice turns into resentment when it's hidden. Now, I can't talk about this drama without talking about the physicality of Scarlett's sacrifice. Donating a kidney is not nothing. It's not like giving blood and then going out for ice cream. It changes you. It's a scar, it's recovery, it's risk. And the show uses that, even if not always explicitly, to give Scarlett a quiet fragility that isn't weakness. She is literally living with less. So when Dante tries to take more from her, dignity, stability, peace, it feels especially cruel. He's punishing someone who has already paid. And yet, and this is important, the show also doesn't let Scarlett's sacrifice become a weapon she uses. She doesn't walk around demanding recognition. She doesn't wave it in his face. That's part of the tragedy. But it's also part of what makes her love feel real. She did it to save him, not to own him. Which brings me back to that contrarian thought. Maybe the sacrifice was also a way to avoid being seen. Maybe Scarlett chose secrecy because being loved openly by mafia heir is terrifying. Maybe the misunderstanding was a way to control the exit, to decide how the story ends, to avoid the vulnerability of being the person who is needed. Being needed can feel like a trap, especially for someone without power. The show leaves room for that reading, and I think that's brave. It doesn't flatten Scarlett into pure altruism. It lets her be human. It lets her be scared. Okay, I want to relive one more moment with you, because it's the kind of mini-scene that defines the show's flavor without requiring me to invent any extra plot beyond what we know. Picture Scarlett behind a counter, the kind of sleek surface that reflects her face back at her like a second, quieter witness. The lobby smells faintly like expensive cologne and polished stone. Her uniform fits like armor that wasn't tailored for comfort. She's doing her job, the normal rhythm of a shift, and then Dante is there. Not rushing, not announcing, just arriving like he owns air. He says something that sounds polite to anyone listening, but the way he says it turns it into a private slap. Scarlett's eyes flicker, just once, to his hand, as if her body remembers the hand that used to hold hers in a different life. Then her gaze snaps back up because she cannot afford to drift. Dante's expression is calm, almost bored, which is the most humiliating thing of all. He is not overwhelmed by seeing her. He is in control. And Scarlett's mouth forms the correct professional smile while her face is quietly breaking underneath. You can practically hear the unspoken lines screaming between them. You can hear Scarlett thinking, if you knew. You can hear Dante thinking, you wanted this. And the scene ends not with a dramatic score swell, but with a mundane continuation of the hotel's life, which somehow makes it worse. The world doesn't stop for your trauma. The world keeps checking people in. That's buried sacrifice in a nutshell. Heartbreak occurring in spaces that demand composure. And I have to laugh, lightly, at myself for how invested I got in the hotel vibes. Because there I was, watching a mafia heir emotionally ruin a woman. And I'm like, wow, great use of reflective surfaces. This is what media analysis does to your brain. You can't just suffer normally. Anyway, the show also understands the eroticism of restraint, but it doesn't always romanticize it. Sometimes it makes it frightening. Dante's restraint is not always self-control. It's calculated cruelty. Scarlett's restraint is not always grace. It's survival. When their restraint collides, you get scenes that feel like they could explode into either violence or confession. That unpredictability is what kept me binging. Now, since I'm speaking to newcomers too, I want to set expectations. This is not a comfort romance. It's a romantic tragedy that occasionally hands you a warm moment like it's contraband. The pleasure is in the tension, in the slow reveal, in the moral knots. If you need your leads to be emotionally healthy communicators, you're going to be yelling at your screen. And if you enjoy yelling at your screen, congratulations, you found your new hobby. But the show's emotional sophistication is what elevates it. It's not just he's mean, she's sad. It's he's mean because he thinks she chose the enemy, she's sad because she literally chose him over her own body. And both of them are trapped by the public story. That's strong. That's tragic. That's sticky. I keep coming back to the word anonymous in the premise. Anonymous donor. Anonymous love. Anonymous salvation. There's something haunting about doing the most intimate thing possible for someone, giving them part of your body, and then erasing your name from it. It's like writing a love letter and burning your signature. It's like being the reason someone wakes up, and then having to watch them live as if you never existed. And the show doesn't treat that as purely beautiful. It treats it as psychologically destructive. Because here's the quiet horror: Dante is alive because of Scarlet. But he's also emotionally dead in certain ways because he believes Scarlet is a predator. So Scarlet's sacrifice saves his body and kills his heart. Not intentionally, but functionally. That is the kind of tragedy that sticks with you after the credits. And Dante's campaign to humiliate her, to punish her as a gold digger, becomes his way of coping with that emotional deadness. If he can reduce her to a stereotype, he doesn't have to grieve the love they had. He doesn't have to admit he lost something real. He can just be angry. Anger is easier than grief. The show knows that. It writes Dante accordingly. I'm going to linger on one more craft detail: pacing. The drama doesn't sprint. It lets scenes breathe long enough for you to feel the discomfort. Some viewers will call that slow. I call it intentional. When humiliation is the weapon, the show has to let you sit in it. When silence is the barrier, the show has to let silence stretch. If the editing were too snappy, it would turn into a highlight reel of cruelty and tears. Instead, it becomes immersive. And yes, sometimes that immersion is painful. There were episodes where I had to pause and go drink water like I just watched a sports match. Which is ridiculous. It's a romance drama. But it's a romance drama that understands stress. Now, I don't want to get ahead of myself because this story has a lot of emotional runway left. And the worst thing I could do is wrap up my feelings too early like I'm done with it. I'm not done with it. The show isn't done with you. The premise alone sets up a kind of inevitable collision. Dante's resentment versus Scarlet's truth, public narrative versus private reality, life saved versus love destroyed. And the part that really kept me locked in, the part that made me feel like this wasn't just another rich man revenge fantasy, is that Scarlet's sacrifice isn't just a secret waiting to be revealed. It's a wound that shaped every decision after. So when Dante humiliates her now, it's not just present-day cruelty. It's him stepping on a scar he doesn't know exists. Which raises the most deliciously painful question the show keeps hovering over without answering right away. When Dante finally learns the truth, will that knowledge transform his love into worship? Or will it transform his guilt into something even uglier, something possessive, something that tries to rewrite the past by controlling the future? Because a man like Dante doesn't just say sorry and move on. A man like Dante, raised in power and war and family betrayal, might treat truth like a claim. And Scarlet, who orchestrated misunderstanding to be let go, might find that the truth is not freedom at all, but a new kind of cage. And that's exactly where the story starts to get really dangerous. Not in the mafia way, but in the intimate way, in the way where you can feel two people about to collide, and you're not sure if the impact will be reunion or annihilation. So let's keep walking through it, because the next layer isn't just the past and present tug-of-war. It's the way the show begins to hint that Dante's obsession with humiliating Scarlet isn't purely about revenge anymore. It's about trying to force a confession out of her without admitting he wants one. It's about dragging her closer under the guise of pushing her away. And Scarlet can sense that shift even as she keeps trying to maintain the distance she built her entire new life around. And the show gets weirdly honest about that push-pull, because it doesn't pretend revenge is a clean emotion. Revenge is sticky. Revenge is intimate. Revenge means you're still letting someone live in your head rent-free. And Dante is basically hosting Scarlet in there like she's an unwanted tenant he refuses to evict because he needs someone to blame for the way his life cracked. What starts to creep in as buried sacrifice settles into its groove is this uncomfortable sense that Dante's humiliation isn't even satisfying him the way he expected it to. You can feel it in the rhythm of his cruelty. There's that initial strike, the little smirk, the public jab, the calculated moment where he makes a small in front of other people, and then a quiet aftertaste. Like the room goes still, and he's left alone with the fact that it didn't fix anything. That's such a human detail, And it's where the show stops being trope and starts being tragedy. And Scarlett, who should by all rights be the moral center, isn't written as a simple victim either. There are beats where she looks at Dante like she's watching a storm she once loved. She's terrified of him, yes, but she's also grieving him. That combination is brutal. It's not just, I miss my ex. It's, I miss the version of you who existed before the ICU, before the war, before your family proved you were disposable. And she can't say any of that out loud, because the minute she says anything tender, it becomes an invitation. If you're thinking, okay, so is this just two hot people torturing each other in expensive lighting? Give it a second, because the show's real tension is not the romance. It's the secret's gravity. Every scene is basically orbiting that buried kidney donation like it's a black hole. One of the smartest choices Buried Sacrifice makes is that it doesn't treat the donor reveal as a gotcha twist. It treats it like a slow moral infection. It changes how you read everything, even the moments when nothing happens. Dante drinks a glass of water and you're thinking about kidneys. Scarlett winces when she shifts her weight and you're thinking about recovery. A throwaway line about weakness lands like a dagger. The show knows that once you understand what Scarlett did, you can't unknow it, and it uses that to make ordinary interactions feel loaded. And here's where my sympathy got complicated in a way I didn't anticipate. Dante's obsession with labeling Scarlett as a gold digger doesn't just expose his cruelty, it exposes his fear. Because if she's a gold digger, then their love was never real. And if their love was never real, then losing it doesn't hurt the same way. The gold digger label becomes emotional anesthesia. That's not me excusing him. That's me saying the show actually understands how people build protective narratives. And if you've ever had your heart broken and then immediately rewritten the entire relationship as they never cared anyway, you know what that is. It's coping. It's not truth. What keeps the drama from becoming purely sadistic is that it seeds these tiny disruptions in Dante's certainty. A moment where Scarlett's reaction doesn't match the stereotype. A moment where her eyes flicker with something like pain that looks too genuine to be performative. A moment where she could take an easy opportunity to manipulate him, and she doesn't. The show doesn't have to invent grand evidence. It just has to let the mask slip occasionally, because human beings are inconsistent, and lies crack under pressure. And if you're waiting for the story to flip into an easy, he finds out, he grovels fantasy, I'll just say this. Buried Sacrifice seems way more interested in the cost of finding out than the dopamine of the reveal. It's not asking, will the truth come out? It's asking, what kind of man will Dante become once the truth rearranges him? That's a much harder question, and it's the one that kept me chewing on scenes long after they ended. You can feel the drama building toward that eventual collision, not with frantic plot mechanics, but with emotional inevitability. Like watching two cars slowly roll toward each other on black ice. Nobody can steer. Everybody sees it coming. That dread is the fuel. There's also a really understated theme running under all the romance theatrics, bodies as battlegrounds. Dante's body failed him. Scarlett's body was altered to save him. The mafia war is a background threat that turns bodies into messages. And in the present day, Dante tries to use Scarlett's body again, not physically, but socially, by forcing her to stand in shame, by placing her in positions where she's watched, judged, diminished. The show keeps tying vulnerability to physical presence. It sounds heavy when I say it like that, but it plays out in simple staging. Scarlett behind a desk. Dante across from her. Space as power. Eye contact as a weapon. It's cinematic without needing explosions. And because this is a 2026 release, I have to give it credit. It looks like it knows what it's doing. The lighting design alone is telling a story. The hotel scenes are all cool tones, reflective surfaces, glass and marble, and that faint sense of being on display. The NYU memories, when they appear, feel more textured, less polished, more skin. Even when the past is painful, it feels human in a way the present doesn't. That contrast isn't just aesthetic, It's emotional commentary. The present is controlled because both of them are controlling it. Every few episodes. Again, speaking generally without pretending I have your exact episode map memorized like some kind of emotionally haunted librarian. The drama seems to shift how it uses flashback. Early on, flashback is romance and loss. Later, flashback becomes explanation. Not explanation in a here's the answer way, but explanation in a here's why this choice might have felt necessary way. That shift matters because it gradually changes Scarlett from mysterious woman enduring abuse into person with agency who made a terrifying calculation. And that's where I want to talk about Scarlett's agency more, because a lot of viewers will automatically frame her as purely selfless. But agency doesn't always look empowering. Sometimes agency looks like making a choice that ruins your life because every other choice ruins it more. The kidney donation itself is the ultimate act of agency in a world where Scarlett has less formal power than the men around her. She can't stop a mafia war. She can't restructure Dante's family. She can't make half-siblings care. But she can do this one thing. She can place a piece of herself into his survival. It's a private power move in a public world that doesn't give her power. That idea is both beautiful and horrifying. Beautiful because love can be that brave. Horrifying because why is this the only power she has? And yes, I'm aware I'm spiraling like I'm a therapist. That's what this show does. It drags you into the moral basement and locks the door. Now let me offer another contrarian reading that surprised me while watching. I don't think Dante's cruelty is only about punishing Scarlett. I think it's also about punishing the version of himself who loved her. Because love made him vulnerable. Love made him trust. Love made him think he could have a normalish future despite the mafia inheritance looming like a shadow behind him. When his father died and the war ignited and he ended up in ICU, love didn't protect him. So now, he's trying to erase the part of himself that believed in it. And what better way to do that than to degrade the person who represented that belief? That's why his humiliation has this obsessive quality. It's not a one and in revenge. It's repetition. It's rehearsal. It's him trying to convince himself over and over. See? She's awful. See? I was right to stop loving her. See? I'm not weak. Except his actions reveal the opposite. He's still emotionally tethered. You don't build a whole campaign around someone you're indifferent to. And Scarlett, in an equally tragic mirror, seems to be punishing herself too. Her silence isn't just protection of Dante. It's self-flagellation. It's like she decided she deserved to be hated for deceiving him, even if the deception saved his life. So she stands there and takes it. She lets the lie keep hurting her, because maybe she thinks that's the price. That's the kind of romantic tragedy I actually enjoy, because it's not just external conflict, it's internal collision. Speaking of internal collision, the show's handling of guilt is quietly savage. Scarlett's guilt is complicated because she did a good thing in a bad way. Dante's guilt, when it eventually starts to peek through in the form of doubt, is complicated because even doubting his narrative feels like betrayal of his pain. People get attached to their pain. The show seems to understand that. It doesn't treat pain like something you simply heal from. It treats it like something you can build a personality around. And if you ever looked back on an old heartbreak and realized you stayed angry longer than you needed to because anger was the only thing keeping you from feeling how much you cared, yeah. This drama knows that game. There's also something deliciously cruel about the fact that the most important act in this entire story is medically intimate and yet emotionally invisible. A kidney donation is literally internal. It's hidden under skin. It leaves scars you can cover with clothing. It's not like a grand public gesture. So it matches the theme, love that is real but unseen. And I want to praise the show for not turning that into a saintly aesthetic. Scarlett isn't shot like a glowing angel. She's shot like a tired woman. She's shot like someone who has to wake up and go to work with a body that has changed and a heart that hasn't caught up. Also, small but important, The hotel job choice is genius because hotels are where you smile through discomfort. You get yelled at and you keep your voice steady. You get spoken to like furniture and you still say, of course. Scarlett's work environment trains her to tolerate mistreatment, which makes Dante's cruelty even more effective. He's exploiting a system that already requires her to swallow humiliation. That's not romance, that's predatory. And the show knows it because it frames those moments with this faint sense of nausea. The camera doesn't always glamorize it. Sometimes it stays just far enough away that you feel like a witness, not a participant. Now, I need to talk about Damien again, but from a different angle. The easy interpretation is that Damien is the rival, the villain, the man Scarlett aligned with publicly to hurt Dante. But what Buried Sacrifice hints at, structurally, is that Damien may also function as a narrative scapegoat. He's the convenient face Dante can hate. He's the tangible enemy. But the deeper enemy in Dante's story is abandonment. It's his half-siblings refusing to help. It's the realization that blood doesn't equal loyalty. That's a much scarier enemy because it can't be punched. So Dante focuses on Damien and Scarlett because they're easier targets than the truth, that his family failed him. And Scarlett, by aligning with Damien publicly, knowingly steps into that scapegoat role. She gives Dante an enemy story that keeps him moving. Because if Dante had to sit in the emptiness of being unloved by his family while his body failed, he might not recover emotionally. He might not even fight to live. The show doesn't have to say this. It just sets the pieces so you can feel why Scarlett would choose a villain costume. But of course, wearing a villain costume for too long changes you. Even if you know it's a costume, other people start treating it like your skin. That's why 3 years later, the lie hasn't faded. It has calcified. There's a particular sadness in that time jump that the drama nails. 3 years is long enough for people to build habits, routines, new identities. Scarlett has become someone who works at a hotel and keeps her head down. Dante has become someone who wields power and resentment like a twin set. They're not the same kids from NYU. They're older, and the trauma has shaped them. So when they collide again, it's not a simple rekindling. It's two changed people meeting in the ruins of something they never properly buried. The show's title is doing that double meaning thing: buried sacrifice, buried relationship, buried truth, buried self. And let's be real, the show is also doing something that romance dramas sometimes avoid: letting the male lead be genuinely frightening without immediately sanding him down. That's risky, because you can lose audience trust if the cruelty feels like it's being sold as sexy. Buried Sacrifice walks that line by making the cruelty feel like a problem, not a treat. It makes you want him to stop, not want her to submit. That distinction is everything. Still, I can't pretend every viewer will experience it that way. If you're sensitive to humiliation dynamics, this show can be rough. It doesn't always offer quick relief. It doesn't always hand you a counterbalance scene right after a nasty one. Sometimes it lets the cruelty hang in the air, and that can feel oppressive. But when it works because it's emotionally honest about how oppression feels. It's not tidy. There's a moment in the drama's emotional flow. Again, I'm keeping this general, that feels like a pivot. When you start to sense Dante's hatred becoming less cleanly hateful and more confused. Like he begins to notice Scarlett isn't reacting like someone playing a game. She reacts like someone protecting something. And that confusion is where the romance tension becomes almost unbearable. Because confusion is the doorway to curiosity. And curiosity is the doorway to truth. If Dante gets curious, the whole narrative cracks. If Scarlett senses his curiosity, she has to decide whether to feed it or shut it down. Either choice is dangerous. That's the kind of tension I live for, because it's not just will they kiss. It's will they survive the truth. Okay, I promised you a vivid mini-scene retelling, and I already pulled you into the lobby vibe. But I want to take you somewhere else. The hospital period. Because even without inventing exact shots, the premise gives enough to feel it. Picture the ICU corridor energy. The air is cold in that way hospitals are cold, like cleanliness has a temperature. The fluorescent lighting is unforgiving. The soundscape is distant beeps, soft footsteps, muted voices that are trying not to disturb grief. Dante is somewhere behind a door, fighting for his life, acute kidney failure, making his body a ticking clock. His father is dead. A war is igniting outside those walls, a war that doesn't pause because someone is dying in a bed. And Scarlett, young, probably exhausted from crying in bathrooms, and trying to keep her face steady in front of people who would eat her alive if they sense weakness, makes a decision that is both insane and profoundly human. She chooses to be the anonymous donor. She chooses surgery. She chooses to cut herself open so he can keep living. And then, after, she chooses to cut herself open emotionally too. She chooses to perform betrayal publicly. She chooses to stand next to Damien, the rival, the half-brother, the symbol, and let the world see it. Let Dante see it. Let the narrative harden immediately, before hope can creep in. That's the kind of choice that makes me feel sick in the best way, because it's so extreme, and yet emotionally I understand it. If you're trying to make someone let you go, you don't do it gently. You do it brutally. You make yourself unlovable. You make yourself easy to hate. Scarlett makes herself easy to hate so Dante can keep living without looking back. And the show frames that not as a victory, but as a tragedy. Because you don't walk away from something like that intact. When I think about that, I also think about the psychological violence of being anonymous in your own love story. Scarlett is the hero and the villain at the same time, depending on what information you have. The audience gets to know the truth. Dante doesn't. That imbalance is what makes watching him hurt her feel like watching someone punch a wall that secretly has your name written on the other side. And before someone says, well, why doesn't she just tell him? Yes. Yes. That's the question. That's the point. That's the endless agony of this premise. But the show, to its credit, doesn't treat just tell him like an easy fix. Because confession isn't just confession here. Confession reshapes power. Confession potentially paints a target on Scarlett's back. Confession potentially triggers mafia consequences. Confession potentially turns Dante's guilt into possession. Confession potentially makes Dante feel like he owes her. And debt in Dante's world is not romantic. It's ownership. So the silence becomes a strategy, even if it's a self-destructive one. Now, I'm going to be honest about something that bothered me a little, even though I'm firmly in the loved camp overall. Sometimes buried sacrifice leans so hard into the drama of concealment that it risks making Scarlett's pain feel inevitable, like the universe is determined to punish her no matter what she does. And I don't love narratives that treat women's suffering as fate. I prefer when the story makes clear that suffering comes from human choices, not cosmic destiny. The show mostly does that, but there are moments where the melodrama edges toward she must suffer because she's noble. And my allergy to martyrdom narratives flares up a bit. However, when the writing is sharp, it counters that by showing Scarlett's choices as imperfect. Not wrong, but complicated. It shows the cost of her decision not as noble punishment, but as a realistic consequence of building a lie. Lies don't just cover truth, they create new realities. Scarlett created a reality where Dante hates her, and she has to live in it. That's not fate. That's architecture. And Dante, too, is living in the architecture of his own narrative. He built a story where he was betrayed. He built a persona that survives by controlling others. He built a worldview where love is manipulation. And that worldview makes him powerful, but it also makes him lonely. The show uses loneliness as a quiet undercurrent. Even when Dante is surrounded by power, you feel his isolation. He's a mafia heir, which is basically a fancy way of saying he grew up in a world where affection has strings. His half-siblings refusing to help him in the ICU isn't just a plot detail. It's emotional devastation. It tells him, even when you're dying, you're not worth saving to your own blood. That kind of wound doesn't heal quickly. So when Scarlett appears, she becomes the one person who could challenge that narrative, except he thinks she confirmed it. He thinks she proved love is fake. That's why he's so vicious. He's defending the only truth he can tolerate. And this is where I'll admit I had a very specific emotional reaction watching. I felt protective of Scarlett in a way that surprised me, but I also felt a weird ache for Dante's younger self. Not present-day Dante, who is out here making humiliation look like a hobby, but the boy who fell in love at NYU, who probably thought he could outrun his family's darkness with one person's light. That's tragic. That's not an excuse. That's tragedy. The show is asking you to hold both feelings at once. Protect her, grieve him, hate his actions, understand his pain. That's a mature ask for a melodrama, and I respect it. Now, a little craft nerd moment, because I can't help myself. The show's use of eyelines is doing heavy lifting. It often places Scarlett slightly lower in frame, not necessarily because she's physically lower, but because she's emotionally bracing. Dante is often shot with more space around him, like he's not constrained. And when they're in the same frame, the negative space between them becomes its own character. It's the secret. It's the 3 years. It's the kidney. It's the war. It's everything unsaid. There are also moments where the editing intentionally lingers half a beat too long after a line. That half beat is where you see regret flicker, or fear, or longing. It's where the actors get to act without dialogue. I love that. I love when a show trusts its performers enough to let their faces finish the sentence. And yes, I'm speaking like I personally know the editor. I don't. I just notice when someone is good at their job. One thing I want to highlight for fans who are deep in the ship war trenches. Buried Sacrifice isn't asking you to romanticize humiliation. If you come to it hoping for purely dominant male lead fantasy, you might still find the power dynamic compelling, but you're going to be forced to confront the ugliness of it. That's intentional. The show wants you to feel the harm. It wants you to see how easily love becomes a justification for cruelty when power is uneven. At the same time, it doesn't flatten Dante into a villain, because that would be too easy. It gives him the kind of interior conflict that can make you furious and invested at once. That's the sweet spot of good drama. You're not watching because you like everyone. You're watching because you can't stop thinking about why they're doing what they're doing. And speaking of why, let's talk about the theme of reputation. In mafia narratives, reputation is survival. Dante humiliating Scarlett publicly isn't just petty. It's him protecting the image of himself as someone who cannot be betrayed without consequence. That image keeps other people in line. It keeps rivals cautious. It keeps allies loyal. But Scarlett's reputation is disposable in that system. She's not protected by legacy. She's not protected by blood. So Dante can ruin her socially without risking much. That imbalance is the horror. And Scarlett's earlier public alignment with Damien was also about reputation. She needed Dante to believe she chose power, because that would make him cut her off. She needed the mafia world to see her as attached to a rival, because that might shift threats away from Dante at a vulnerable moment. Public image is like chess here. People are moved. Pieces are sacrificed. Scarlett literally sacrifices part of her body, and then sacrifices her image. That's double sacrifice. So when Dante sees her again 3 years later and decides to humiliate her, he's not just punishing her. He's reactivating the same public narrative she created. He's taking the lie and using it to hurt her again. The lie becomes a weapon that changes hands. That's such a nasty, elegant piece of writing. Now, I can hear the question forming in your mind if you're watching along with me. Okay, but what about love? Where is the romance in all this? The romance is in the ruins. The romance is in the moments where, despite everything, they still recognize each other. The romance is in the involuntary softness. The romance is in the memory of who they were. And because the show is not shy, it knows exactly how to make those moments hurt more than they please. There a particular kind of scene buried sacrifice excels at. The near tenderness that gets poisoned. Dante says something that almost sounds like concern, then he twists it into an insult. Scarlet almost smiles, then she catches herself. Dante almost reaches, then he retracts. Those huff motions are devastating. They're like watching two people step toward each other and then remember the minefield. And if you've ever had a relationship where the past is both a comfort and a weapon, you know why those huff motions feel so real. Also, can we talk about how the show uses the concept of miracle? Dante is miraculously saved by an anonymous kidney donor. Miracle is a religious word. It implies grace. It implies someone intervened beyond normal human limits. And the show flips that. The miracle isn't divine. It's human. It's scarlet. And the grace isn't celebrated. It's punished. That inversion is the show's core cruelty. It also sets up the eventual moral reckoning in a way that's almost biblical. When Dante eventually learns, whenever that happens in the story's timeline, he's going to have to face the fact that he desecrated his own miracle. He took the thing that saved him and treated it like trash. That's not just guilt. That's existential. And I don't say that lightly. The premise alone implies that reveal will hit like a truck, because it's not just, I misjudged you. It's, I built my life around hating the person who gave me my life. That kind of realization doesn't just create a grovel scene. It creates a crisis of identity. Here's where I want to applaud the show for not making the Huff siblings a throwaway detail. The fact that none of Dante's Huff siblings were willing to help him is a core wound that explains so much. It explains his obsession with loyalty. It explains his harshness. It explains why he interprets Scarlet's public alignment with Damien as an unforgivable crime. Because to Dante, loyalty is not a vibe. It's the difference between life and death. So when Scarlet betrays him at that moment, he experiences it as being left to die again. That's why his reaction is so disproportionate. It's trauma logic. And that's also why Scarlet's sacrifice is so devastating. She was loyal enough to give a kidney, but she wasn't loyal in appearance. She chose to look disloyal so he could live. In Dante's world, appearance and reality often collapse into the same thing, so he can't separate them. The show uses that to explore a dark truth. In violent power systems, perception is reality. Intent doesn't matter if the narrative is set. Scarlet's intent is pure. The narrative is not. And she chose that narrative on purpose. So she's both victim and architect, again. Now, I'm going to share a personal reaction that hit me in a very specific way. And I don't usually get this specific, but the show pulled it out of me. I had a family member in the hospital years ago, and there's this smell hospitals have, this mix of antiseptic and stale air and anxiety that clings to your clothes. Watching the ICU-related flashback energy in this drama, even in a stylized way, brought that smell back in my brain. Suddenly, I wasn't just watching a romance tragedy. I was remembering the feeling of sitting in a waiting area, pretending you're fine, because if you break down, you'll never stop. Scarlet's choice, in that context, made me tear up in a way I didn't expect. Not because it's realistic in every detail, but because emotionally it captures that desperation, the sense that you would do anything to keep someone alive. And then to watch Dante, alive because of that desperation, turn around and weaponize his power against her. Yeah, that hurt. That's the point. But it still hurt. If you're still with me, good, because this is where the drama's deeper themes start to glow. Sacrifice as control, love as violence, truth as danger, and the terrifying idea that saving someone can ruin you. Buried Sacrifice also has this undercurrent about what women are expected to endure in the name of love. Scarlet endures physical loss, emotional loss, social humiliation. And the show doesn't let you forget that her endurance is not rewarded by the world. It's punished by the world. That feels depressingly accurate. At the same time, the show seems aware of the audience's appetite for a payoff. It builds tension in a way that makes you crave the moment Dante finds out. It's dangling that catharsis like a carrot, and it knows fans will chase it. The question is whether it delivers that catharsis ethically, meaning, does it treat Scarlett's pain as something to be redeemed or as something to be romanticized? From what the premise suggests, and from how the drama carries itself, it seems like it's aiming for redemption through reckoning, not redemption through fantasy. Dante doesn't get to just be forgiven because he's sad. He has to face the harm. He has to sit in it. He has to see Scarlett as a person again. And Scarlett, too, has to face something, the cost of deciding someone else's truth for them. She has to confront whether her sacrifice was love or fear or both. That's why I keep saying this drama is emotionally sophisticated. It's not because it's subtle. It's because it's willing to interrogate its own tropes. Now, I want to talk about chemistry because none of this works without it. Buried Sacrifice's central relationship dynamic depends on the actors being able to generate heat under ice. They need that sense of shared history that doesn't require exposition. They need to make you believe that beneath the resentment, there's still recognition. And the show does that with micro-expressions. The way Dante's gaze flickers when Scarlett looks away. The way Scarlett's shoulders tense when Dante steps close, like her body is bracing for impact, but also remembering touch. That's chemistry. Not just flirting, but nervous system memory. It's the kind of chemistry that makes a scene where they barely speak feel louder than a shouting match. Also, I have to appreciate the drama's sense of humor, because it's not a comedic show, but it occasionally lets a dry, almost absurd awareness slip in. Like the sheer ridiculousness of two people having the most life-altering unresolved secret in the world while standing in a lobby where someone is complaining about room service. The contrast is so sharp it becomes darkly funny. Life does that. Trauma does that. You can be dying inside while someone asks you to validate their parking. The show uses that contrast to ground itself. It reminds you the world doesn't care about your epic love story. Now, if I had one big critique, it's that the drama sometimes risks making Scarlett too saintly in the way she absorbs punishment. Not always, but sometimes. And for a show that's otherwise so good at complexity, I wanted a little more mess from her. I wanted more moments where she is angry, not just sad. Because anger would be earned. Anger would be human. But to be fair, the premise itself suggests Scarlett's entire strategy is to ensure Dante will survive and let her go. That strategy requires her to swallow anger. It requires her to be the villain. So the lack of overt anger might be part of her internal self-policing. She can't afford to let herself feel like a victim because then she might confess. So maybe the Saint Lines is a mask too. And if that's the case, then the show is doing something even darker. It's showing how self-sacrifice can become a prison identity. Scarlett becomes the one who endures, and that identity might be hard to shed even when she wants freedom. That's heavy, but it's also compelling. Let's zoom out for a second, because I want to talk about why Buried Sacrifice feels addictive even when it's painful. It's because the central secret is not just informational. It's emotional. It's moral. It's bodily. It hits multiple layers at once. In a weaker drama, the secret would be a twist to shock Dante and then force a reunion. Here, the secret is a moral bomb. It raises questions about agency, consent, gratitude, debt, revenge, and what love looks like when it's filtered through violence. And because the show is set against a mafia backdrop, it also plays with the idea that love and violence are intertwined in Dante's world. He expresses love through possession, through protection, through control. Scarlett expresses love through disappearance, through self-erasure, through sacrifice. Those are not compatible love languages. They're tragic opposites. That incompatibility is the real conflict, even more than the misunderstanding. So as the story progresses, what you're really watching is not just will he find out. You're watching whether these two people can ever love each other without destroying each other. That's a much more interesting question. Now, there's another angle I want to bring in Because fans always debate this. Does Scarlett's sacrifice make her morally superior? The show clearly frames it as enormous love. But I don't think it wants you to treat Scarlett as morally above Dante. Not because Dante is equally good, but because moral superiority would simplify the tragedy. If Scarlett is purely good and Dante is purely bad, then the story becomes punishment and forgiveness. But if Scarlett is good and flawed, and Dante is bad and wounded, then the story becomes transformation and reckoning. Scarlett's flaw, if we can call it that, is that she chose the lie. She took control of the narrative without Dante's consent. She decided he needed to let her go. That might have been necessary, but it's still a decision that robbed him of truth. And Dante's flaw is obvious. He uses power to harm. He punishes rather than asks. He humiliates rather than listens. He clings to a narrative that justifies cruelty. So both of them are trapped in control strategies. Scarlett controls by disappearing. Dante controls by dominating. Neither is healthy. Both are understandable in context. That's what makes the drama feel real beneath the melodrama. Also, can we acknowledge how rare it is for a romance drama to make the female lead sacrificed her body trope feel this psychologically complex? Usually, it's just a purity badge. Here, it's a scar that shapes the entire story. And this is where I want to rehook you again, because we're approaching the emotional cliff the show keeps edging toward. What happens when Dante learns the truth is going to be less about romance and more about whether he can live with himself. Because imagine it. Imagine being Dante. You wake up alive because someone donated a kidney anonymously. You spend 3 years hating your ex, humiliating her, calling her an opportunist, blaming her for aligning with your rival half-brother. You build a worldview around her being heartless. Then you discover she was the donor. She was the miracle. She was the reason you're breathing. That realization would not just break your heart. It would break your identity. And that's why the reveal, whenever it comes, has to be handled carefully. It can't just be tears and a hug. It has to be a reckoning with shame. Real shame. The kind that makes you nauseous. The show sets itself up for that. And I loved it for that. It doesn't set itself up for a cute apology. It sets itself up for a collapse. Now, let's talk about what kind of collapse would feel satisfying. Because fans always want catharsis. I want catharsis too. I want to see Scarlett acknowledged. I want to see her pain validated. I want to see Dante humbled. I want to see him suffer the weight of what he did. But I also don't want the show to turn that into punishment porn. There's a difference between accountability and cruelty. The show has been making Scarlett endure cruelty. It shouldn't just flip that and make Dante endure cruelty as entertainment. It should make him endure truth. It should make him endure his own conscience. And the drama seems to understand that the most painful punishment for someone like Dante is not humiliation in public. It's powerlessness in private. It's realizing you can't undo what you've done. It's realizing that even if Scarlett forgives you, you might not forgive yourself. That's the kind of emotional terrain buried sacrifice is primed for. Also, I need to mention the Huff siblings again, because I think the show's smartest long-term play is that the donor secret doesn't just rewrite Dante and Scarlett's relationship. It rewrites Dante's relationship to his family. Because if Scarlett saved him and his siblings refused, that's a profound indictment. It forces Dante to confront where loyalty actually exists. It forces him to ask, who is my family? Who has earned my trust? That could shift the mafia power dynamics in a way that's actually thematically meaningful, not just plotty. Because the show isn't really about mafia politics. But mafia politics are a pressure system that reveals character. And Dante's family betrayal is the root of his emotional brutality. So the truth isn't just romantic. It's political. It's existential. Now, I want to talk about the show's title one last time in relation to the idea of burial. There's a difference between burying something and letting it rest. Burying can be concealment. It can be denial. It can be suppression. And suppressed truth doesn't rest. It leaks. In buried sacrifice, The truth leaks as resentment. It leaks as humiliation. It leaks as obsession. It leaks as Scarlett's quiet pain. It leaks as Dante's inability to move on. So the show is essentially saying, you can bury a sacrifice, but you can't bury its consequences. And as someone who loves drama that actually uses its premise as metaphor, I ate that up. Let's also talk about sound design again for a second, because it deserves a little more love. There's a way the show uses quiet to make you feel exposed. In the hotel scenes, the ambient sound is controlled, almost sterile. In the NYU flashbacks, the sound feels more alive, more messy, laughter in the distance, traffic, campus noise, the world being normal. In the hospital sequences, the sound becomes clinical, rhythmic, mechanical. Those soundscapes aren't just background. They're emotional environments. They cue your nervous system. They make you feel the difference between safety and performance, between love and war. And the music, when it enters, tends to underline grief more than romance. Which is the correct choice, because this is a romance built on grief. Now, I'll give you a lightly funny aside, because this review is getting intense and I need to breathe. If someone ever tells you romance dramas are unrealistic, just remind them that human beings regularly stay in situations that are emotionally catastrophic because of one look from someone they used to love. Like, we don't need mafia heirs to make bad decisions. We do it for free. Okay, back to pain. One of the things that made me love Buried Sacrifice is that it doesn't treat Scarlett's job and environment as filler. Her life in the hotel is not just a backdrop to meet Dante again. It's a portrait of how she's been surviving. She's not living, she's maintaining. The show makes her survival feel like routine, like she's built a life designed to minimize risk. That's what trauma does. You design your days to avoid triggers. And then Dante walks in like the trigger itself. So the drama becomes about whether Scarlett's carefully constructed survival can withstand the return of the person she built it around escaping. And Dante, similarly, has built a survival strategy. His is dominance. His is control. His is revenge. His is a sense of superiority that keeps him from feeling vulnerable. Scarlett's presence threatens that too, because she is the one person who saw him before he became this. She's the one person who knows he had softness. So they threaten each other's identities. That's why they can't just be normal. They're not just they're witnesses. Now, if the show has a weakness, it's that sometimes it leans on the audience's patience to a degree that might frustrate some viewers. The slow burn of truth can feel like stalling if you're not invested in the psychological tension. But if you are invested, the slow burn becomes the point. Because the longer the truth stays buried, the more damage it does. That's narrative logic. And for fans, that slow burn also gives you time to sit with the moral complexity. It gives you time to feel how wrong Dante is, and how complicated Scarlett's silence is. It doesn't rush you to forgiveness. It lets you simmer, which I appreciated, because I hate when a drama rushes its own accountability. Now, I want to talk about the emotional architecture of the likely final stretch without inventing specifics. Most dramas like this move toward a cluster of reveals and reckonings. They often do a latent pivot where the male lead starts to suspect something doesn't add up. They often do a mid-season shift where the cruelty begins to soften into confusion. They often do a final stretch where the truth becomes unavoidable and the relationship either transforms or collapses. Buried Sacrifice feels built for that kind of structure. But what makes it interesting is that the truth here isn't just a secret. It's a bodily fact. It's not, I did something. It's, I gave you something. That changes the emotional stakes of confession. Because if Scarlett reveals she was the donor, she's not just revealing her love. She's revealing her vulnerability. She's revealing that she is physically marked by this relationship in a way Dante is too, whether he knows it or not. That's why the reveal, when it comes, will likely be less about shock and more about grief. Dante will have to grieve what he did. Scarlett will have to grieve what she lost. And the audience will have to grieve the years wasted in hatred. And that's why this drama feels so heavy in a good way. It makes you feel the weight of time. Time is the real villain sometimes. 3 years of hate. 3 years of silence. 3 years of a lie being treated as truth. You can't get those years back. Now, I'm going to pause on Dante again because we've been dragging him, and he deserves it. But I also want to acknowledge the show's skill in making his cruelty feel like a symptom, not a personality. That matters because it sets up the possibility of transformation. Transformation doesn't mean he becomes nice. Transformation means he becomes honest with himself. Dante has been living in denial. Denial that he loved Scarlet deeply. Denial that his family's abandonment broke him. Denial that his survival came from love. He's replaced all that with rage. So the journey for him, if the writing is consistent, is not learn she was the donor and then propose. The journey is learn she was the donor and then confront the fact that he has been using power to avoid grief. That's what I want from this story. I want grief. I want reckoning. I want Dante to look at Scarlet and realize that the thing he called opportunism was actually sacrifice. I want him to realize he has been insulting the purest act of love he has ever received. And then I want him to sit in the shame of that, not just apologize and move on. Scarlet's journey, meanwhile, is about learning to be seen, not just by Dante, but by herself. She has been living as if her own needs don't matter, as if her body is a resource to be spent. She needs to reclaim her own life. Even if she loves Dante, she needs to stop defining love as self-erasure. If the show can land that, it becomes not just tragic romance, but a story about self-worth. And I think it can, because it has already seeded the idea that Scarlet's sacrifice isn't purely healthy. It's loving, but it's also self-negating. Now, I want to touch on the mafia war element again, because it's easy to treat it as backdrop, but it has thematic weight. The mafia war ignites when Dante's father dies. That means Dante's romantic life is shattered by patriarchy, by inheritance, by the violence of legacy. His father's death triggers not just grief, but a power vacuum. And in that vacuum, Dante's body becomes a target, his life becomes a bargaining chip, his half-siblings become competitors rather than family. So the love story is crushed by the machinery of male power. Scarlet's sacrifice is her attempt to intervene in that machinery with the only tool she has, her body. That is devastating. It's also politically resonant in a way romance dramas don't always dare to be. It's saying, when men wage wars for power, women bleed in private to keep them alive. Again, heavy, but the show invites that reading because the premise is literally about a woman donating a kidney, while men fight for inheritance. And yes, I'm aware this is a lot. But buried sacrifice is a lot. That's why we're here. One more thing I loved. The show's willingness to make the misunderstanding not just a plot device, but a moral act. Scarlet orchestrates a cruel misunderstanding. The word cruel matters. She didn't just quietly disappear. She did something designed to hurt Dante. She did it because she believed the hurt would save him. That's morally complicated. It means Scarlet is not purely gentle. She is capable of cruelty in service of love. That's such a fascinating contradiction. It makes her feel real. It also means that when Dante is cruel to her now, there's a twisted symmetry. Not equivalence, Dante's ongoing humiliation campaign is still awful. But symmetry in the sense that their relationship has always been shaped by love expressed through harm. That's the tragedy. They learned to weaponize love because their world taught them love is dangerous. Now, let's rehook again with a question that kept haunting me while watching. If you saved someone's life and they spent 3 years despising you, would you still want them? Or would you want them to finally know the truth, just so you could stop carrying it alone? That's the emotional knife buried sacrifice keeps pressing against Scarlet's throat. Because Scarlet isn't just hiding the truth from Dante, she's hiding it from the world. She's carrying it alone. And carrying something alone changes you. There's an isolation to her that the show captures beautifully. Even in crowded scenes, she feels alone. That's good direction. That's good performance. That's the kind of loneliness you can see in how someone stands. And Dante, ironically, is isolated too. His power isolates him. His resentment isolates him. He's surrounded by people, but he trusts nobody. That's why his obsession with Scarlett is so intense. She was the one person he trusted, and he believes she betrayed him. So he's living in a world where trust is dead. Both of them are lonely. They're lonely in opposite ways. That's why their reunion is so charged. They're not just facing each other. They're facing the possibility of not being lonely anymore. And that possibility is terrifying when you've built your entire survival around loneliness. Now, I want to address a fan debate I can already hear. Is Scarlett's sacrifice romantic or toxic? The answer is yes. It's romantic in its scale, in its devotion, in its willingness to give. It's toxic in its secrecy, in its self-erasure, in its assumption that she must disappear to protect him. The show seems aware of that duality, and that's why it feels modern rather than purely old-school melodrama. Older dramas would present Scarlett as purely saintly, and Dante as purely redeemed once he learns the truth. Buried Sacrifice feels like it wants to complicate that. It wants to show that even saintly acts can cause harm if they're built on deception. And I respect that. Because I'm tired of narratives that treat martyrdom as the ultimate feminine virtue. At the same time, I don't want to judge Scarlett too harshly, because her context is extreme. Mafia war. I see you. Half siblings refusing to help. A young woman in love watching the man she loves die. In that context, people make desperate choices. We can analyze it all day, but emotionally, I get it. That's why this drama works. It makes you think and feel at once. Now, let's talk about the hotel again, because it's not just a setting, it's a metaphor for transience and performance. Hotels are places where people are never truly at home. They're places where you can reinvent yourself for a night. Dante comes into the hotel like he's home anyway, because power makes every space yours. Scarlett works there like she's part of the furniture, invisible unless needed. So their dynamic is embedded in the architecture. Dante is the guest. Scarlett is the staff. Even if Dante and Scarlett were equals emotionally, their roles in that space would still create hierarchy. And the show uses that hierarchy to amplify the pain. Scarlett can't respond freely because she's at work. Dante can because he's Dante. That's the imbalance made tangible. Also, I love how the show uses Manhattan's social ecosystem. The city is full of people like Dante who can disappear into wealth, and full of people like Scarlett who can disappear into labor. The show isn't making a sociological essay, but it's aware of the environment's emotional impact. Now, if Buried Sacrifice has one superpower, it's making you feel the physical sensation of swallowed words. Scarlett's silence is not empty, it's full. The show makes silence heavy. That's hard to do. Most dramas rely on dialogue to carry emotion. Here, silence is a character. And Dante's dialogue, when he's cruel, is often polite on the surface. That's another superpower, weaponized politeness. It's much scarier than shouting, because politeness gives cruelty plausible deniability. It lets Dante hurt Scarlett while maintaining social control. It also traps Scarlett, because if she reacts, she looks unprofessional, unstable, guilty. That's such a realistic depiction of how power operates in public. Okay, I'm going to slow down and talk about the romantic fantasy aspect, because even though this drama is painful, it is still serving certain fantasies. The fantasy is not he's mean. The fantasy is he cares enough to be obsessed. The fantasy is your love was so powerful it literally saved his life. The fantasy is you are irreplaceable. Even in hatred, Scarlett is irreplaceable to Dante because he cannot let her go. That fantasy is seductive. It's also dangerous if unexamined because obsession is not love and humiliation is not passion. Buried Sacrifice seems aware of that danger, and it tries to frame obsession as pathology rather than romance. But it also uses the heat of obsession to keep you watching because this is drama. Drama is not therapy. Drama is not supposed to model healthy behavior. It's supposed to make you feel. And I felt, unfortunately. Now, as we get closer to the end of this review's journey, I want to hold off on a final verdict until we've really sat with the full emotional ecosystem. Because this story is big. It's not just about whether Dante and Scarlett reunite. It's about what kind of love is possible in a world like this. And if that sounds too grand, well, the premise is literally she gave him a kidney and then made him hate her. We're already in grand territory. One of the things I'm most curious about, and what I think the show is teasing, is how Dante will respond once the truth is undeniable. There are a few possible routes, emotionally, and the show could choose any of them without betraying its premise. He could collapse into guilt and become self-destructive. He could become possessive, trying to make up for the lost years by controlling Scarlett's future. He could become protective in a way that feels like love, but is actually debt repayment. Or he could actually transform, learning to respect Scarlett's autonomy and letting her choose whether she wants him. That last option is the hardest to write, because it requires Dante to give up the thing he clings to most, control. So if Buried Sacrifice sticks the landing, it will be because it understands that redemption is not a grand gesture. It's a change in behavior. It's a change in power use. It's Dante learning that love is not ownership. Scarlett, too, has to change. She has to stop sacrificing herself as a default. She has to learn that being loved does not require being erased. She has to allow herself to be seen, even if being seen is dangerous. That's the emotional endgame I'm rooting for, because it's the only one that feels like healing rather than just reunion. But even if the show doesn't give full healing, I think it can still be satisfying if it gives truth. Sometimes truth is the only justice tragedy offers. Now, I'll admit, I love this drama, but I love it in the way you love a song that makes you cry. It's not comfort. It's catharsis. It scratches an itch in my brain that wants to see characters forced to confront the worst versions of themselves. And Buried Sacrifice excels at that confrontation energy. We also have to acknowledge the sheer audacity of making organ donation the central romantic secret. It's bold. It's borderline operatic. And it works because the show commits. It doesn't wink at it. It treats it with gravity. There's a sincerity in the writing that saves it from camp, even when the premise is heightened. Now, I can't wrap this up yet, because I want to spend more time on the performance's emotional mechanics, since this is a long-form review, and we're not rushing. Scarlett's actor, as I said earlier, has to do a lot with very little. The most impressive moments are the ones where Scarlett's face cycles through multiple emotions in seconds. Fear, longing, anger, guilt, then a return to neutrality. That emotional cycling feels like someone who has practiced emotional regulation for survival. It's believable. It's heartbreaking. Dante's actor has to make cruelty feel like a choice and a compulsion at the same time. The best moments are when you can see him hesitate just slightly before delivering a humiliating line, as if part of him knows it's wrong, and then he does it anyway because he's addicted to being right about her. That addiction is key. He's not addicted to hurting her. He's addicted to the narrative that justifies hurting her. That's a subtle difference, but it changes the character from villain to tragic monster. And Damien, even without me diving into specifics, needs to be played with enough ambiguity that you can't easily categorize him. Is he manipulative? Is he opportunistic? Is he just a rival by circumstance? The premise positions him as Dante's greatest rival and half-brother, which means his mere existence threatens Dante. If the show plays him as a mustache-twirling villain, that's boring. If it plays him as a complex participant in the power structure, that's more interesting. From the way the premise frames him, I suspect the show uses Damien as a chess piece rather than a full romantic competitor. And that's smart, because this story doesn't need a love triangle. It needs a truth triangle. Now, one more theme: gratitude. Dante is alive because someone donated a kidney. Gratitude is the natural response. But Dante can't direct gratitude because he doesn't know who to thank. So gratitude curdles into suspicion. Meanwhile, Scarlett, the donor, doesn't receive gratitude. She receives hatred. That absence of gratitude is emotionally corrosive. It could make her bitter. It could make her regret. The show plays with that tension by showing Scarlett still caring despite everything, which is both beautiful and tragic. But I would love, at some point, for the story to allow Scarlett to feel resentment. Not just sadness. Resentment. Because resentment would be earned. Resentment would be a way of acknowledging that what she did cost her, and she is allowed to mourn that cost. If the show gives her that, it elevates her from martyr to person. And that's what I always want: personhood. Okay, I'm going to pause at a natural beat here, because the next thing I want to unpack is the specific kind of catharsis this drama is building toward, and how it can either nail it or fumble, it depending on whether it treats the truth as romance candy or as a moral earthquake.